Hello, leavers and believers and everyone. Hello and welcome to Leaving Hillsong. My name's Tanya and I am super excited that you are here and that we're all here because I missed you last week. We sat up compiling the evidence and putting things together, and by the end of it, it was a little bit precarious. So we decided to err on the side of caution. This is best. Now, welcome to today. Welcome to our little show. I'm going to introduce you to a beautiful married couple, Scott and Kat. Now, Scott and Kat are remarkably distinct individuals, as you'll find out, and yeah, that kind of harmony and melody together as a married duo. They're a lot younger than me. I suppose they're about 30 or something, and they've had a lot of life experience between them and a lot of Hillsong life experience, particularly music, and that's why today is by the door of the ear. They're fancy. Sometimes we're a little fancy here, a little bit upper class. And so that's one to think on. Kat and Scott met in Hillsong. One of them basically grew up there. The other was churched. And yeah, they spent their 20s, Scott more than Kat, on stage. He's a singer. And Kat is classically trained. She plays the violin. Well, they're just fantastic. We sat down. We've actually sat down to talk 3 times and come up with these guys have just got so much wisdom and experience and just knowledge of how it all works, and particularly the music element of Hillsong. It's brand new stuff for our show. It's really, really interesting. And we just talked and talked and talked. Quick heads up. There is a mention of self-harm halfway through. Bit of a warning. Apart from that, just warn you, you're going to have your pants charmed off by these two. But Hillsong is all about the music. It is the absolute gateway drug down that slippery slope. So, to understand Hillsong, you got to have a look at the music, and you got to take a look at it firsthand, up close, and pick it apart bit by bit. And that's why I'm just so grateful to these two people for taking the time to really do that. Another thing was that I actually edited this and found like a really, good old cliffhanger, and went back to edit the rest of it, and I just really liked it. So it's a long episode, you know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe you'll get stuck in traffic. I don't know. I just really loved it. So. Let's jump into By the Door of the Ear, Part 1, with Scott and Kat. Kat and Scott, thank you for making this time. You guys lead such busy lives. I really, really do appreciate it. And we've got this little window and so much to talk about. So thank you so much. Can I just hand over to you, and you tell us about how you guys wound up in Hillsong and wound up together? Is that an okay start?
Yeah, we can do that. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, you go.
Okay. I wound up in Hillsong because I sort of semi grew up in the church. So like my parents are kind of Christianish. So I've got an Italian side of the family and the English side of the family. The Italians are very Catholic. So I was always around the church growing up, and my nonno and nonna very, very Catholic, went to church like every Sunday of their lives.
Kind of a very Australian background, isn't it? It seems to be like chunks of church in the family and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And my mum put me in church because she wanted me to have a good moral upbringing. And so I was just kind of around church world a lot. And that's how I encountered Hillsong music, because I was in the Catholic church, and then I moved over to the local Anglican church because it was more exciting by local church standards. And they were singing Hillsong songs. And so when I mentioned that to a friend of mine when I was in year 7, I just started at a new school. And I mentioned, I knew he was a Christian. And I was like, oh, yeah, do you know these songs? And he said to me, oh, I know the people who wrote those songs. And I was like, what? How does that work? Like, you knew the people who wrote the songs we were singing at our church on a Sunday? And he was like, yeah, that's my church. And it turned out that his dad was a worship pastor at the church, which was Hillsong. And so my friend's dad was the music pastor, and that meant that, kind of he had an in with a lot of like the crowd of people who were doing a lot of the songwriting. He said, oh, do you want to come to church? And I was like, yeah, I'll definitely come. And so we went to a youth night at Waterloo in 2001, I believe it was.
Okay.
And
timing,
yeah, interesting timing, right? And I kind of turned up and I met all these people, and like my church, my little local church, there were 3 of us in the youth ministry. So when I turned up to the youth, wildlife at Hillsong City, I mean, it wasn't huge like it is now, or was now. I don't know. I don't know what's going on there now, but it was still way bigger than that. There were hundreds of kids there, and I just remember feeling very much like, oh my God, like this is kind of cool. Like and I met all these people who were really different and cool and my age. I didn't love school. I didn't have a great time at school, but at church, this youth group, people were very accepting and very loving and very interested in me. And I really liked the attention. And so I stuck around. Like I was there and I only really left in 2019. I left the day after the federal election, where Scott Morrison would be, because I was so, that's another story. But I think, I was there for what ended up being close to 20 years.
And starting out backstage. That's interesting. Kind of, sort of.
Yeah. From the start, I kind of knew that there were the people doing the music and being creative, which is what I loved doing myself. And then there were the people in the congregation, and there was very clearly like that was clearly a divide, and not in a nefarious way at the time. I don't remember, I just remember being like, oh, it's cool to be on stage. Right? It's cool to be on the platform. And remember wanting that at a very early age, very early time in my time at Hillsong. So a couple of months later, probably, I just remember saying to someone, oh, I'd really like to be involved with the music team. And they said, oh, just go and ask. And I think, I can't even remember who was in charge at the time, but I went up to somebody at youth and I said, can I sing? And they said, yeah, sure. So they gave me a mic, and the next, couple of weeks later, I was up there singing. And, I was on team from then until I left. Like the morning of the day I left church, I was singing. So my time at Hillsong was very much framed by being involved in the music, being around people who were writing songs. There was a period of time where I went on a few Hillsong adjacent international tours, doing worship music in places like Romania and the Netherlands and the UK. That was, a really enlightening experience, because we went as we weren't technically Hillsong. In fact, I think the pastor that took us, even though he was a Hillsong pastor, I think he got in trouble for saying that he was from Hillsong by the church. But, we ended up playing essentially like very, very large venues, doing Hillsong music internationally, which is very different to, the Hillsong United team doing Red Rocks.
Okay. So these are like church service things, like big productions?
Yeah, well, like we did one of the biggest venues in, like indoor venues in Bucharest, for instance.
You could almost put
tour.
It was like, look, I was very much the B team for like Hillsong music. But like there really was like, there are definitely levels of hierarchy within the team, and as far as like where I sat within that.
Well, you weren't on staff. That's the main difference.
No, I wasn't on staff, but
because those big tours, those main tours are all, they're all on staff, those musicians.
So who pays the tickets to Bucharest then for you?
Oh, it was the pastor who paid that one. However, the second tour we went on, he did ask for a loan of so that I could, put the money up front, and then he paid me back. But I think he made a loss on that tour, and I ended up being out of pocket.
He didn't pay him back.
He didn't pay me back, no.
Oh my goodness! See, and these loan things are a side thing, but they just seem to come up too often. These accidents, can I pay you later things?
Yeah.
Oh no, did you not get that email? All that kind of stuff. Damn. Yeah, that seem to happen too often. So these are like church service things, and you're playing the music. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, look, that was just like a small part of it all. Like for the most part, I was there every Thursday, Friday, Sunday, sometimes Saturday, and depending on if I was doing a sisterhood service or something during the week, I'd be doing that as well. So, I'd just be rostered. So I'd be rostered to a service, but I was singing for the most part, I was there like once a week, doing a worship service at Hillsong City, somewhere in there, and occasionally I'd be I'd do like the entertainment center a couple of times, or I was doing backing vocals in a room for conference. They put us in a room backstage to sing backing vocals.
I see. So the crowd doesn't know there's backing vocals.
Yeah.
So doesn't see the backing vocals, perhaps.
Yeah.
The optics are.
I think generally you get a better sound when you've got more control over the audio, and you want the faces to be up front. Like you want your backing vocalists at conference to be the superstar singers that everybody recognizes. So people like me who were regularly singing and had skills as backing vocalists, because I was doing it for like 15 years, so I picked up some skills and how to do it in a half decent way. But people like us would be, I guess, put backstage so that they could control our vocals and put them into the mix to sort of boost the audio. But yeah, no, I feel like I'm being very generous about all of that. But yeah, that was my involvement in it. So.
Which is quite funny, because I was just about to say to you, like, maybe if you hadn't you've just been really humble about that, going, I guess I probably know something after 15 years. Maybe if you'd gone out there with the whole, like, haven't you seen how great I am? That seems to work. People go like, yes, you are. Comes the fun. That's so weird.
Maybe, but I think there's an interesting thing at Hillsong in terms of like how you get to the position of being one of the front, like the main vocalist of the church it is an enigma that we don't speak about, like, and I would regularly have people ask me, how do I do what you do? How do I get up the front there? And I'd be like, I'd give the line, which is, you've got to be diligent. You've got to have good character. You've got to be like humble, and you've got to get your skills up and make sure that you're really skilled. But I actually don't think any of that stuff was really as important as either knowing the right people, or literally, it's going to sound really lame, but being cool, like, being relatable, and like having the qualities that I guess we would want from an influencer, maybe, or like for lack of a better word, like a celebrity, the things that make people great frontline vocalists in sort of contemporary music going to be the same things that work at church. But I don't know how you tell somebody that in a church service you have to be like this in order to be promoted to those roles. Like
wouldn't it be the person with the best voice? This is what I never understood.
It's absolutely
no, because it's so much more, like, the charisma so much more important really than the quality.
And I won't for now name names or anything, but there's certainly been people that I go, and we also, it happened that the Hillsong music happened the same time in the 90s as Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston and stuff and all that. So I've always been like, really, like, is that really all the best you've got, you guys putting certain people forward? So that's all. So you're telling me there are people with much better, more amazing voices that
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
some
yeah,
are in a back room doing backing vocals instead of up the
yeah,
front with Selena Ross. Okay.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that what makes somebody worthy of being up the front. Sorry, our kids just come to join us again.
Don't apologize.
I think what makes someone really, I think how somebody fits that role is going to change depending on the cultural zeitgeist. So maybe when Mariah Carey is the big name, that's what you want from your vocalist. You want them to be like that. And that's the period in which you get, people who are essentially like echoes of those very popular singers, but then you hit our age, like our sort of millennial sort of coming of age moment, and what's cool becomes something very different, and I'm not saying, because I think the Joel Houston United era definitely taking after sort of Nirvana kind of inspiration-y kind of stuff, but then you kind of hit our era and the look changes, the feel changes, and then you hit Gen Z and it changes again, and it becomes something much more akin to, I don't know, like sort of the big artists right now, right? So I do think that the reason it's never articulated or what's going to get you up the front is because you kind of have to feel like at the moment, or maybe not at the moment, it's a bit old hat, but like 5 years ago, you needed to feel like Billie Eilish, or you needed to feel like somebody else to kind of be noticed. And I think I'm very conscious that it's possible that there are people listening to this who have been much more involved in Hillsong worship. I don't think that they consciously think like that, but I do think that that's what you end up getting is like what Young and Free was 5 years ago is, even now it's different because the look has changed, the feel has changed, the style has changed, and so they adjust with those changes to echo culture.
That sounds like a lot of pressure on the people on stage to hang on to their role. Yeah.
I think, yeah. And I think when you stop being that person, like those people from the 80s and 90s who were the big shots.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden their look and their vibe was not the thing that was cool anymore, I do think that devastated them. I know a lot of them, and I do think that it actually wrecked a lot of them internally because the things that gave them value no longer did.
And we know how quickly people are discarded and forgotten, and also prophesied over as, the greatest thing that's ever going to hit the earth, and you're going to, have this greatness, and then it starts to happen, and then the zeitgeist changes, and see ya.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Cap.
Yeah, Cap, go.
Cap, where were you born, and how did you wind up with these people and that man sitting next to you that you call your husband? How did that all happen?
I grew
How'd
up
you get to Hillsong.
I grew up on the North Coast of New South Wales, so in a very regional area, and I went to a small church in that area, and so I was in one of those very small churches that was playing Hillsong music to varying degrees of quality. And
so North Coast for people is like, it's kind of hippie land, kind of
quite hippie,
laid back, really gorgeous area with beaches, lots of free spirits going on there.
Yeah, that's right. And I was learning piano, violin, etc. from primary school onwards, and so then I naturally got involved in music at my small church. And my parents, similar to Scott's, grew up in the south of Sydney. Actually, we worked out that my dad went to the same school as Scott's mum's close friends. That's how close in Sydney they were.
So you always had Sydney connections.
Yeah, so my parents grew up Catholic as well and converted to Pentecostalism in the early 80s, I do believe.
Okay, that's interesting. That's not as that's not one we hear about as often, but it is a contingent Catholic Pentecostal kind of.
Yeah, well, I think they met on the North Coast where I grew up, and they converted to Pentecostalism, and it was kind of, in a way, it was like the Christian answer to the hippie movement. And so it was kind of very much had that vibe. I grew up in a Pentecostal church, the early part of my childhood, which was very woo-woo, all of those kind of 80s woo-woo, 90s things going on.
Well, what do you mean? What's your woo-woo? What's your version of woo-woo?
Oh, like just after every single service, like people lying on the floor laughing and
Okay. Good old Toronto times.
yeah. So I saw all of that kind of stuff as like I have memories of it at 5 years old, 6 years old. So
those kids that watch that stuff. I hope you older parents are listening, right? They grew up and they saw what you did. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, well, so we ended up leaving the Pentecostal church in our area because, my dad had some mental health issues that were not taken seriously by the leadership of that church. And
Oh no, especially in line with that woo-woo.
well, yeah, exactly. They just wanted to pray it away, and even my mum wasn't, stupid enough to think that was a good idea. So, and wanted to seek professional medical help for my dad. So that was a reason to leave that church in the end. But I grew up the rest of my childhood in a uniting church with a really lovely pastor there. But who's still a good friend of mine, actually, a good mentor of mine. But we used to play like Hillsong songs. And so then when I was about 16, I went to the youth part of the Hillsong conference in Sydney 1 year. And I was very sort of taken away with that and how amazing the music was. And, it was like this incredible experience for me as a teenager. So a couple of years later, when I was finishing school, I had already auditioned and gotten into a music degree to start after I finished school, but I wanted to take a gap year. And then that year that I was in year 12, my parents went to the Hillsong conference again that year and basically came back like convinced I should go to Hillsong College for my gap year, which, I was 16, turning 17 at the time. And I thought, oh, yeah, whatever. I can do that. I mean,
so your parents continued to go to church even after the negative experiences they'd had.
Oh, yeah. So we wound up in
because you were in uniting.
Yeah, and that's right. Like the minister we had there was a really great person who I'm still in quite close contact with, So.
And then, so that's interesting. So then I guess because uniting is so broad and stuff and inclusive, going to a Hillsong conference wouldn't be a big deal. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they're very inclusive. And from my parents' perspective, like they had great sort of children's ministry. Like during the church service, they had great things for their kids to be doing during the service so that they'd be engaged with, Christianity. And then when I was a teenager, there was great sort of youth stuff with just a tiny group of us, sort of 4 to 5 teenagers. And, I had a really nice community there. And I would say it made a big impression on me as a young person and quite in a positive way.
Did you enroll in?
At college?
Yeah.
I did the worship stream. So on keys, on keyboard.
Okay.
Since that was my sort of main kind of instrument at the time.
Throw us on the map here. What year are we talking roughly? Even?
I did college in 2006, the year straight after I finished school. My parents thought I should go to City College, which is where Scott would have been at the time, though not at college, at the church. And I said, no, I want to go to the big, the big sort of flagship campus at Borkham Hills. So they helped me move down there. I found someone to board with, and off I moved at the age of 17 down to Sydney, a 10-hour drive south of where we live, just for context for anyone. And so, I started at the college in a way, like, I don't know, it's kind of funny to look back at it, but in a way, I kind of had my sort of teenage rebellion that year. I kind of ended up rebelling against everything it was about during the college year. Like, I mean, I enjoyed aspects of the college and like hearing a lot of the, the stories of people that have come on your podcast. Like my experience is wildly contrasting to that because, I'm Australian citizen. I'm not under threat of deportation or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I do remember that being a lot of conversation for people, other people at college. That they had to scan into the class and they needed to be tracked that they were there. Otherwise, like they could end up with their visa cancelled sort of thing. But for me as an Australian, like I could just waltz in anywhere, waltz out again. No one cared.
There'd have to be some visa, like you'd have to attend a certain amount of hours a week or something in for people. But it's not that quick a jump where if you miss a class, your visa would be cancelled.
I mean, I can tell you now, Tanya, because I'm a tertiary educator now, that there are rules on visa holding students, But when you're monitoring attendance to your tertiary classes, there is leeway, and there is meant to be a process by which you consult with a student who, say, hasn't attended more than 20%. They've skipped more than 20% of the classes, and then you would start to make contact with that student and sort of ask what the problem was. You wouldn't just have, absolutely not, would there be any kind of like blanket threat to the student that if you don't attend, like there's going to be all kind of severe consequences, in a reputable public
17-year-olds, 17, 18, 19-year-olds who are 10 hours from home by air a lot of the time. I mean, I wouldn't know what the rules are on the other side of the world.
No, exactly.
I trust the good people. Yeah.
Yeah, that was definitely a thing that I know, like, a lot of the internationals were having to consider. But for me, like, I really, I don't know, I really didn't take my attendance at the college very seriously. I mean, I attended the things I wanted to go to. I quickly worked out what was worth going to. And so I kind of basically approached it that way. And, it's funny for me because, like, I was doing the worship stream and I kind of went in knowing that it was probably going to be pitched at kind of a lowest common denominator, like in terms of like my music progression, say. And then it was going to be more about sort of how to play at this particular church. Like, I was very aware that would be how it would go. Yeah, so I did that year. Look, there's not really much to report about my year at college. Like, I had all the same, pressures in a way of the people that have spoken before about, all being at the conference 18 hours a day and all of that. But for me, I actually managed to skip sort of the whole intern program at this church. Because I mentioned my minister from the North Coast, who was like a great mentor as a team. He actually moved to another Uniting Church in Sydney, like right nearby, Hillsong. So he actually, I was telling him, because I was in contact with him, I made contact with him when I realised it was nearby, Borkham Hills. I said to him, I've got to do this intern program. And he said, why don't you come do it at my church, which was a Uniting Church. I said, oh, that's a great idea. So I applied then to college to do my internship with him, which then meant I didn't get any of that kind of, photocopying experience that a lot of your other people had.
Sorry, photocopying.
Oh, sorry. My uncle likes to call work experience photocopying experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually had quite a nice little internship at this Uniting Church near Hillsong.
So my question is, like, if an international college student had wanted to intern at another local church in Sydney, would they have been allowed to?
Yeah, probably not. No, but that was my college year. I did this internship with my former minister from the North Coast. It's around June in the year, and so that's like, almost coming up to halfway through my year at college. So then from then on, I took it another step again. So, because what they have at church when you're at college is that you have to serve in 2 services and sit in 1 service. So you got 3 services that you're doing essentially. But after I did this internship, I then realized I could actually just move all of my like serving credits, you could say, for the college to his actual church. So I just moved everything. I just moved everything over to this other Uniting Church. So I was serving at the other.
But how did that go? Were there any concerns? Was there any issues raised?
Well, from Hillsong itself? No, not at all. They just said, go ahead, go do that if that's what you want to do. And so in terms of what I was doing at Hillsong, I was playing keyboard just like at the college services in the end. And I was playing violin in like a little orchestra, which I was involved in starting up. And I was serving at kids' church during sisterhood services. And I was doing street things. So I was still doing a fair bit at Hillsong, but, in terms of my weekend involvement, I had managed to majorly cut that down by serving at.
And that's interesting because people talk about, the pressure to turn up and the pressure to contribute and all those kinds of things. So you keep kind of being like, exit stage, right? I'll be back in 5, going up the shop to buy some milk and never coming back, sort of thing. How did you get away with that or escape the guilt or what do you think?
Yeah, well, as I said, it was kind of my like a bit of a rebellious year for me, like down with these authorities and I'm going to do whatever I want. And so, because I never really like skipped school or anything like that, I didn't have any of that kind of rebellion. And so I kind of had it at Hillsong College in the end. Yeah, so that was when I was sort of 17, 18. And then my parents ended up moving like closer to Sydney, like not into Sydney, but just at another coastal area, just a couple of hours north of Sydney. So I ended up moving with them to save money when I started my real university degree. And
what was the curriculum like? Okay, so come on now. You just said your real university degree. Stop it now. People go through a lot of trouble to get these qualifications. So I'm jumping ahead, but what was the curriculum like comparatively? Because you then enrolled in a music degree.
Yeah, well,
She's being very tactful.
I studied at Sydney Conservatorium of Music, which is
right
the top music school in Australia. And it was a pretty big contrast. But I mean, look, it was a classical music degree as well. So in that sense, it's going to be contrasting. But I was also doing a Bachelor of Arts at the same time at sort of the main campus of the University of Sydney, which is really where the main comparison should lie, because that's where my sort of academic tertiary level courses ran. Like my music degree was about playing the piano, essentially, you know. But in my Bachelor of Arts, like that's where I had, you know, proper like critical discussion with other students and lectures that involved kind of proper referencing and readings and scholarly material to consult. And that certainly, although there was a degree of that at Hillsong College, you really can't compare to a public institution like Sydney Uni. No.
Yeah.
Although I will say, to be fair, on Hillsong College, that I was in quite close contact with a few academics from Hillsong College who they were real academics, and they were even at the time wanting to start a Bachelor of Music at Hillsong College, and they were upskilling themselves and like trying to work out what that would involve. So I think there were people with like an intent to do something a bit more rigorous at Hillsong College, but yeah, my own experience was, again, to be fair on it, it was classed, I think, as a Certificate 4, which, you know, it's not meant to be the same level as a degree in that sense. So yeah, I mean, it was just a big contrast for many reasons, including those, to go to then Sydney Uni. So I lived with my parents for 2 years at like north of Sydney and commuted to university. And then a couple of years later, once I had the money, I moved to the city, to Glebe in Sydney. And then the natural thought for me at that time was, well, I should go back to Hillsong, but now I should go to the city campus. And I went just a couple of months after moving. Straight away, I met some really great people who were kind of part of like the university community at Hillsong City. You know, those people, that was a really great experience being with, you know, hanging around those people. And that is how Scott and I met, essentially, through one of those people, like a mutual friend. And at City, I ended up far more involved than I ever was at college. Like I attended City for 10 years.
That's because you met a boy.
Well, that's partly why, yeah. But I also just much preferred the vibe of Hillsong City to Hillsong Borkham Hills.
What was the difference then?
The thing that I really picked up at Borkham Hills was like that it was very serious, you know, and it was very kind of, well, when important people walk through the door, you pay attention and you know, take it seriously. Whereas City was sort of much more relaxed, I felt. People were friendly all the time. And
that's interesting. Yeah.
People made it feel
that was the original vibe, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, it really felt like a big contrast to me. I mean, it was smaller too, so that may have helped. And so I just had a really great time there for a long time.
What year are we talking?
I first went to Hillsong City in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't leave until 2019 as well. So yeah, 10 years.
So you guys are both 10 years at City based. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So majority of my experience was there at Hillsong City. The first 3 years in particular were, I would say, like really positive. Like I had a really great time. And then in 2013... yeah, like, so the first 3 years in particular were really, really positive. I had a really amazing community. Scott was part of that community. We got to know each other, but were never dating in that time. We were kind of dating by 2012. And then 2013, like, I just randomly decided to move to the UK. because I wanted to do a master's over there, and I just had a very misguided notion that if I went over there, and UK people will laugh at this, but if I went over there and worked in the currency, I'd have a better time saving for the master's I wanted to do. Which anyone who lives in the UK,
musical arts. What were you looking at postgrad? What?
So by then I was working in theatre as a musician and as a dramaturg, as like a research consultant in script work. So I wanted to do a master's that was focused on theatre. So I ended up doing a Master's of Arts in Shakespeare Studies at King's College London. But anyway, before I started that, I went and did a year of teaching. Then I managed to get a scholarship, thankfully, to do the master's. And then I moved to London. And then from there, I naturally went to Hillsong London. And again, I managed to wind up with a pretty great community there. But despite that, I had some pretty horrendous experiences in London, which started to really turn me off Hillsong at that time. And that's okay. I ended up living with a few guys who were sort of key team in the creative team in Hillsong London.
All right. So that says it.
Yeah. No, they were great people. They were really great people. They were under a lot of pressure from various angles at Hillsong London, and I came to realize that Hillsong London was quite a different beast to Hillsong Sydney.
In terms of, like, how did it's so interesting how these things replicate, but have a cultural uniqueness everywhere as well. Like,
yes. Well, I guess the key difference is that Hillsong London doesn't have a college, so it doesn't have that army of people to kind of do the week in, week out sort of, well, essentially the manual labor, right? And you know, these musicians that I lived with, we're talking like 9 services a day sometimes they would play for. You know, it was how many was it? It was 9 a.m, 11 a.m, 1 p.m, 3 p.m, 5 p.m, 7 p.m. So sorry, it's not 9, but it's 7 services.
But then they'd be doing other services during the week, and also like they had to get there very early because they're packing in and out of the Dominion.
Yeah, so they would bump in to the Dominion at 6 a.m. and to be, the musicians weren't doing that, but they were having to get there by sort of 7:30. I'm pretty sure.
Earlier than that, they were bumping in at 5.
No, but the musicians were not bumping in.
Oh, well, but some of them turned up to that stuff, didn't they?
No.
Okay,
no,
cool.
they didn't.
Keep me honest.
But they were there. That means from 7:30 a.m. these people I lived with through to basically 8:30 p.m, 9 p.m. And this is volunteering. One of my housemates ended up being on staff, but the others were all volunteering. You know, and it just seemed like so hectic. Like, you know, in Sydney when we're in creative team, like we'd get rostered for 2 services, and sometimes I would do 3 because I'd say I'd do the 8 a.m, which was meant to be like an acoustic service, followed by 2 others. And I'd do them on keyboard. So I'd do like violin first, and then I'd do 2 other services keyboard. So my maximum was 3, whereas my housemates in London were 7, you know, 7. And it was like so crazy. And that was just the norm for them. It was normal, you know. And so, you know, one of the worked closely with my housemates got wind of me being there, like a keyboard player, and so asked if I would volunteer for something, like to play. And I replied, like, I think I got a text from this person. I said, look, I'm here. I'm actually on like a pretty prestigious scholarship that's funded my time to be here, and my focus is doing my degree here for that reason. So I can play at Hillsong, but it's going to be very low level commitment. You know, I kind of basically tried to state my terms because I didn't want to wind up playing for 7 services a day kind of thing.
And how was that received?
It might be slightly unfair to say, but basically ignored. I know I never ended up playing for a weekend like that because I actually put my foot down before it ever got to that point. You know, I was asked at very short notice to play for a creative team event by this person, and it was like, I think it was 24 hours notice, and I replied saying, look, I can do it, but you know, the quality is not going to be good if you ask me to play for this event because I don't know any of the songs you're playing. Like, just for context, like they were playing songs at least 10 years older than the ones we played in Sydney, and not just that, they they didn't really play all the same parts and everything that we did in Sydney. They just kind of did their own thing with it in London. So I didn't really feel like I had my head around what they were actually doing with these very old songs that I would not actually remember the chords for. So I just said to him, look, I don't actually know these songs off by heart anymore. Like, it's been, a while since I've played them. So you'd be better off asking someone else, I said to this person. But if you can't get anyone else, I will do it. So he went, yep, and then had me do it. And so I did feel like I didn't play that well, but whatever, he just asked me to do it. And then he asked me to play again the week after. I didn't know what it was I was actually coming to, but it was actually it essentially was an audition for these other musos that were joining.
Okay.
So he wanted me to play keys for this audition of this other bass player and stuff on this creative team night. And basically, so I turn up. I'd been told a couple of songs they were going to play. Again, they were songs I hadn't actually personally played, because they were songs that Hillsong played when I was a teenager, and I didn't attend Hillsong at that time. So I hadn't played them in actual Hillsong. I'd played them in like a tiny church band kind of thing at a different church. I then learned how they were doing it and prepared for this creative team night. And then I got there and we played those three, and that was all fine. And then this person just started calling out random songs to play, right? And one of them was this song called All Day, which for anyone who's been to Hillsong in the last 20 years, it's just like a cult classic, really. Cult's a bad word to use, isn't it? But you know what I mean?
It's perfect.
It's just a really popular song in Hillsong. But again, it's like an old song that I hadn't played in a while. So I knew the chords because it was like a classic song, but I certainly didn't know any standout things to do on the keyboard for that song, And so we played it, and it was fine. But this creative pastor literally turned to me and started dressing me down for not knowing the song. And I actually had a microphone at my keyboard desk, and I talked back to this guy. I said, excuse me, no, I told you I don't know the songs you're doing. And so, yeah, I don't know this song. And then he started harassing this bass player as well about who was a new person auditioning. He was calling songs out at random, just trying to build the pressure up for some reason. Who knows? Why you would do that. I audition people for work, and I can tell you that's just a stupid way to audition people.
In terms of getting the best out of people's audition, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. And I wasn't auditioning. He was already asking me to do stuff, right? And so I just really didn't appreciate being talked to like that. And so I stood up for myself, and I walked away from that meeting, that creative team meeting, and I was like, I'm not playing again. I won't stand for this, And so I told my housemates, who were close friends with this person who'd talked to me that way. And I said, you can tell him, I'm not texting him. You tell him I'm not playing again. And that was the end of it. So I just never did anything else. And I was at Hillsong London for a good extra sort of 9 months after that. But I'd never played again after that experience.
How was that received? Did you, was there any change in treatment or rostering or any kind of privilege or friendliness? Or
the thing is that I lived and had close friendships with people who were on key creative team, So it didn't really make a difference to me, because after that, after I said, no, I'm not playing, I'm not getting involved, they left it at that, and I just continued on my merry way, as an attendee sort of thing.
Doesn't seem like that kind of stuff really actually bothers you, though. You're not turning up to church to show everybody that you can take the most amount of punishment on stage and stuff. That's not
no. I was a professional musician by that point. I was paid to work as a musician, and I was not going to be treated that way when I was turning up for free.
Gobsmacking that they don't have a clue.
Yeah, I just wasn't going to stand for it. I would get paid by the hour to do that same work in another context. And there I was turning up, and I would not have someone talk to me like that.
And they lose a conservatorium trained musician. Nice.
Classmates kept on sort of, niggling, oh, do you want to play? I'm like, no, sorry, I'm not playing. I'm not playing. So that was that. I just was really
Yeah.
firm after that, and I said, absolutely not, I'm not playing. And so I didn't play again until I was back in Sydney a couple of years later. We came back to Sydney. That's when Scott and I got married in 2016. And I just went straight back into like Hillsong City creative team. And I think I went back to playing. No, I only went actually because I was still so annoyed by what had happened in London. I was asked to play keys again in Sydney, and I said no, I'm only playing violin because violin's like really low grade commitment compared to keys. Like there's actually quite a lot of pressure on the keys player. But when you're a
So they make you download like equipment onto your like software.
Yeah, so you've got to have all your own equipment. You've got to have all this expensive software and stuff, which actually I had because I was working as a professional musician in theatre. But I was like, no, I'm not going to play keys. Like I don't want to be there all morning, and I'm happy to turn up to my 8 a.m. service on violin and kind of, when you play violin, you're actually just improvising, playing whatever you want. So I was quite happy with that role, and I stuck to that for the rest of my time at Hillsong.
So you were back at City when you got back, yeah?
Yeah, we were back to City, and we were there for 3 more years. And then when I was in London, I started a little bit of a deconstruction process, which then kind of sped up when we got back to Sydney. So I was kind of disengaged from essentially the content being spoken at Hillsong from pretty much from the time we got back. And so I was like in the service reading The Guardian sort of thing.
So you guys are at City Church in 2016 and playing music, and you're reading The Guardian in the during the motivation infomercial speeches. And
it should be said though that at the top, like I was still quite heavily involved in Hillsong and still very committed to it while Kat was going through all of this. So it was.
Yeah, so I mean, the difference between me and Scott is that I grew up in a very fundamentalist Christian sort of environment, whereas Scott did not. So yeah, like I for the first time was sort of questioning all of that. Because actually, when I was at King's College London, they offered a theology degree on the side. So here's another interesting tidbit. I did it. I did this course because it was available, and these ministers from the Church of England in London were just like speaking about the Bible and about sort of the teachings of Jesus in a way that was more similar to like, what I had studied in my master's and my Bachelor of Arts, with kind of proper historical grounding and not sort of like, oh, Moses wrote the whole first 5 books of the Bible, like with actual kind of evidence-based sort of material. And I was like, wow, this is so different and so interesting. And
it falls down pretty quick after that. Hey, when you go back to kind of like love, Jesus loves you. You can have what you want.
I just much preferred it. Like, that's the way I think, I think like an academic. And so I was like, wait a minute. So I'm allowed to read the Bible like I'd read sort of a normal historical book. Like, they're just for context. Like my academic work now, I'm a professional researcher now. And the works that I look at are from 1500 to 1700 primarily. So quite old for the context of, modern history. Mm-hmm. And so there's a whole process by which you look at books of that age, and even more so for books that are 2,000 years old. You know what I mean?
And I mean, if you want to throw in any elaboration on that, because that's fascinating too. We don't get to hear much of that. We get, this is the King James is the best translation, and that's it.
Well, the King James is from the period of history that I specialize in. And, it's a political document, just like, the original copies of the gospel would have been political documents. And so when I was sitting...
tell me what's going on? What's going on? Because is everything kind of a derivative of the old King James that we see now? I mean, when you look at the message, do you just weep, or like what happens there?
What's his name? The guy that wrote the message. I think he's actually a pretty great guy. Like, I think the message isn't like, it's an interesting exercise, and I think it's got its own merits. But it basically the thing that did it for me at King's College London was to say, well, this book is not infallible. It's a historical book. So like the way that these academics from King's College London who specialised in the biblical texts in their academic work, we're talking about these texts as historical texts rooted in a particular period of time with a particular influence on them, and I'd never heard anyone talk about the Bible like this.
What was King James doing?
Well, that's fascinating, though.
Well, King James, Well, King James. You mean King James
Like
in early modern England?
yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, he was. Well, first of all, he was extremely superstitious, King James. He wrote a book called Demonology, which was all about kind of the invasion of witchcraft into Scotland and all this, So he apparently, so my PhD was on Shakespearean music, and there's all these myths and legends around when he first saw Macbeth and stuff, because he was a very, very superstitious guy.
Oh my, wow.
Yeah.
Now, how does that influence the average reader? That's because there's Old King James and New King James, and then I was like, no, I'm New International Version. That's me. I'm an NIV girl, right, for life. What am I missing then, or gaining, or?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, look, I'm not a biblical scholar, so I can't pretend to comment with any kind of authority on the text itself, but I can comment on the period of history with authority, And so there was the Geneva Bible in the late 16th century, which is generally thought to be a pretty good translation from the Greek, although I don't speak or read classical Greek, so again, I can't comment on that text. I mean, King James's Bible was about the new Protestant nation of England. That's what it was about. And so it was about forming that new Protestant nation, and here was the text for that. And I can't comment on the nitty-gritty of that text, but that was the purpose of the text, of that printing of that Bible, Yeah, like that, because during Queen Elizabeth's time, just prior, that was a very tumultuous period where there was a lot of, pressure on her on Queen Elizabeth after a period of Catholicism in England. But when King James comes in, it moves into a bit more of a stable time, and in Protestantism, and the King James Bible and the printing of that is a big part of it.
Okay, and so then, accessibility of the text.
Well, I mean, it would have been part of kind of cementing that Protestantism in early modern England. So that's like the political purpose of the document,
Wow.
So that's all really I can say about it. But it was just really refreshing for me to hear academics talk about the earlier parts of the earlier versions of the Bible like that, like with an academic kind of perspective. And I was like, oh, of course you can talk about a historical book like the Bible like this, because that's what it is. It's a historical book. So then by the time I got back to Sydney, that was how I was thinking of it, which was not kind of a Hillsong way of thinking about it. So it just meant that whatever they were saying from the platform didn't interest me. And so, I checked out. Yeah.
And are you sitting by yourself there because Scott's on stage most of the time?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I was. Yeah,
we had our Connect group. So
yeah, we were sitting with our Connect group on a Sunday morning, and Scott might have been singing, but I was sitting with our friends, kind of thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what's going on for you at the same time?
Oh, like my journey is kind of a little bit different, because like Kat's going through academic world and is very much the academic. I've very much been like grounded in an arts career, and like have a theatre company that I've been running for, at the moment I've been running it now for 10 years. So my involvement as I was acting as well. So I was doing some touring with some shows when I wasn't back in Sydney. So there was a lot of stuff going on. And once I kind of got out of the church bubble, that's when the questioning started happening for me. And I think for me, I guess I started questioning my own interpretation of the Bible. And then I started questioning other people's interpretations of the Bible. And at that point, I had to kind of accept that I couldn't treat it like it was like a book of magic, or like some thing that wasn't as concrete as what it is. And like, I mean, these days I'm basically a materialist about my beliefs. And I'd say part of that is because the way that Hillsong elevates the experiential in sort of a way that means that I was constantly being told that things were the Holy Spirit, or things had some supernatural grounding. And I think what that's kind of done is it's pushed me in the opposite direction now that I've kind of separated myself from it. And I do find it quite hard these days to believe in things outside of the natural, even if I wanted to. But
how do you define imperialist? What does that mean?
I think like believe in what's here and what's now and what's present and what's tangible. And I believe in making a change here and now as well, I think, critically. I've kind of moved away from evangelism as a thing. I don't want to convince people that there is a God and that they need to follow them. We still go to church. Like we go to a uniting church now, which is a wonderful, affirming, beautiful community. And there's definitely room in that church to have these beliefs and still be a Christian. And I think I've found a form of Christianity that doesn't involve evangelism. I'm glad of that. I'm really happy about that. It feels like good news now to me, whereas it really didn't, because I had a lot of friends growing up who a lot of young men my age would have a lot of people who, it's not a real tactful way of saying it, but who've taken their lives, right? And there are a lot of people in my life who've done that, and I've seen a lot of people die in my time, and even when I was a teenager. But yeah, I think the idea that so many of those people have died and now gone to hell was not good news for me. I can't accept that as good news. There's nothing freeing about that. Whereas the idea that, we can bring heaven to earth, and that makes me excited, and that's something that I can get on board with. And, that doesn't make money, because evangelism is how you grow the church. And, you're not going to have big churches if you throw evangelism out the window. But I like that, we found a community that doesn't feel the need to do that. And, with wonderful pastors and wonderful people. And, and that's not to say the people at Hillsong aren't wonderful. I just think that there's some core, if you really want to identify how you end up with a church like Hillsong, I think that evangelism is at the core of it, as well as a number of other things. But,
in terms of when you say evangelism, like out there recruiting kind of.
Yeah, recruiting, like getting people to church, making sure that people believe what you believe, very strictly believe what you believe in order to find salvation. Sorry, I feel like I'm just rambling about this.
It's fascinating. It's really good. And there's other alternatives for people. Like it's even the idea that there could be another form of Christianity that's, tolerable, or like we've all been so terrified into thinking other things in case this slippery slope happens where you end up, out in the gutter suddenly.
Yeah.
And again, I just, not the theologian, don't see the emphasis on church in the Bible as and now it's the be all and end all.
Yeah,
no,
exactly, yeah.
Again, I've said I question my own interpretation of it, and I still question this interpretation. I just don't know if Jesus was talking about starting up, religious nonprofits and
basic religious charities.
Basic religious charities. And I just don't think that that's what he was on about when he was talking about the church ecclesia. I don't think that's what he's on about. I think it's about community. It's about togetherness. It's about unity. There's something political in that as well, I think, about how the small people can gain momentum and power by unifying together, and how nonviolence can overcome the violence of the state. And I think there's so many really interesting things that you totally miss if you just gravitate to this thing of well, it's heaven and hell, and I got to stop people from going to hell. So, and then you lose all the beautiful nuance in the text. And it's I said my journey was different. This sounds very much like your journey, doesn't it? But I think that's how, when we found a uniting church where we are now, I think we realized that Christianity could be like that. And that to me speaks good news. I can't see anything but good news in that. And it's interesting because people have said to me, I've had people outright say, well, then you're not a Christian. And I'm like, no, I am a Christian because I'm a Christian. That's what I am.
Because you identify as a Christian. Yeah, exactly. It's funny, a really common offering message at Hillsong was to do with this story in, I don't even know which gospel it's in, but it's Jesus meets with this woman at a well, and she's had 6 other husbands previously or something. I don't remember how they spun that into an offering message, to be honest, but it came up quite a lot, didn't it?
It's the woman at the well, look how bad she is, and look how, I found a message I've been looking at my notes from when we were back at Hillsong.
Maybe it wasn't an offering message, just a general message, but our minister spoke about this story just a couple of weeks ago and totally reframed it for us, because it's always framed, well, it has been in any Hillsong service I've sat in, where it was this woman was doing the wrong thing, and look how she had 6 husbands and all this, and then Jesus met with her, where she was at, kind of thing. This is which is very closely related to how they would frame an altar call. You know, Jesus is going to meet you where you're at. And our minister the other week was just like, if a woman in that period of time had had 6 husbands, probably like she was actually just being passed along, you know, because, you know, she was infertile, or she was a very young woman who'd been like picked up by some older man and then passed on to some other older man, you know, like she was actually a victim. It was just a total reframing
Or
of
through
that.
the brothers, like if your husband dies and you move on to the next brother or something.
You know, that was like what was missing for me from the way sort of Hillsong would preach about various biblical stories like that, you know. But the thing that ended up doing it for me, like the reason I left, which is different to the reason Scott left, is because we started this theatre company, which is classed as an incorporated association in the scheme of like not-for-profit organisations in Australia, which has a whole series of checks and balances it needs to follow, you know. And so in Australia, you have a not-for-profit that is earning under $200,000. You have a certain amount of checks and balances, and then if you go over that threshold, it has a whole lot more checks and balances required. And I was just I mentioned that I would sit in Hillsong services and not actually engage with the sermon. So the reason I left, I was sitting in a service one time, and I don't know how I got to this page, but I essentially found, so I'm in charge of all the compliance side of our theatre company to make sure that as a not-for-profit, it is following the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission rules. And so I came across this page, and it was just this independent auditor or someone who specialised in not-for-profit who'd basically gone through all of the top religious organisations in Australia. So we're talking like the Anglican Church, the Catholic Church, Hillsong, and had looked at their financial reporting to the ACNC. And this is back in 2018. And he had this sort of assessment of Hillsong's activities back then. And one thing he'd written was that they had deemed themselves not requiring an auditor. And like we'd been sitting, you know, in the Heart for the House service, you know, just a few weeks before, where they'd boasted about how they'd raised $9 million or something like that, you know. And so a huge amount of money. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, hang on a minute, my tiny little theatre company, which earns, you know, under $100,000, is requiring an order to get tax-deductible giving status. And here's Hillsong deeming themselves not requiring an auditor, and they're allowed to do that because they're a religious organisation. And it outraged me. Like, I was furious. I was just like, this is not reasonable. Why are religious charities not subject to the same rules as every other charity? And I mean, I don't think that churches should have to pay tax or anything like that, but I do think they should be subject to the same rules as every other charity, you know? Right. And I just, when you talked the other week about how they've split their organisation into all these teeny tiny little charities so they could get away with like lower reporting scrutiny, you know?
All you have to do is go on the ACNC, I think, .gov.au website, do a search for charities. You put the word Hillsong in, and I mean, last count was 20 came up, and they're just, you know, Hillsong Church, Hillsong, you know, HC companies, Hillsong Church, you know, all these different ones, open, shut, and that's just the ones with Hillsong in the title. That's not Bella Burgers. Ever had a Bella Burger? Because they run that company, right? So that is an outrage, and this whistleblowing, I think, has kind of blown the whistle on things a lot further in the system, like these giant loopholes. People shouldn't be able to climb through these giant loopholes, yeah?
No, like, to me, like for us, when we work in the not-for-profit sector, like it's rage-inducing, you know.
I'm just horrified. I tithed. I was a tither. Like, you know, my first job, I tithed into that. And my parents were not, they were very Hillsong cynical. Like, my family already had a history with Hillsong prior to my joining. So, and were already cynical because of that. I'd had relatives that were involved in the teams and had, you know, one relative who was very close with Frank, actually. But, you know, so I kind of had like, they were anti-Hillsong. And when they saw how much money I was giving, my parents were horrified by all of that. And they kind of had a right to be. But of course, like at the time, I picked fights with them over that sort of thing. But I look at now and I'm thinking, like, you know, this is my first paycheck. I went to this church. And like,
And they
meanwhile,
took
it's been spent on
And they took it.
chauffeurs. Yeah, they took it.
and
Bigger
encouraged you to work more. It's because on the flip side as well, and I need to get somebody better at it than me to talk about it, but somebody actually pays for that, and it's the taxpayer. And
Yeah.
when they're
that's exactly
and
right.
you know, I'll never forget somewhere down the south coast in Warrawong, there was a place that lost their funding for $80,000 to give homeless people meals. And it was during the Tony Abbott era where he was breaking coffee tables and stuff while he was drunk at Parliament House and stuff. But, you know, and they cut the funding to that. But, you know, on the other side, there's these huge chasms of just go for your life. And, you know, little, like you're saying, smaller organizations trying to do their best, push that dollar further
Yeah.
because, you know, the funding requirements and,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So that's like, and you know, whatever comes of these financial allegations that are going through now, like, you know, they're obviously outrageous. But even back in 2018, when this guy just made a simple statement about they've deemed themselves not requiring an auditor, that was enough for me. Like, I was like, I'm not giving another cent to this place.
Yep. Yeah.
Mhm.
And people have got questions about the audits that have happened, and then you kind of wonder what if that's how they've treated their documentation. It's not going to be audited. I don't care I don't know. So it's a whole process, like it's a whole systemic problem. Home.
Yeah. And I think they all just kind of think, I think they've done it for so long that the idea that it wasn't supposed to be that way, I think, was lost somewhere in time. I'm sure George knew it was dodgy, but like, I just think so many of these pastors just got used to it and just were like, yeah, this is just how it goes.
Yeah, well, I mean, the other thing I didn't mention is that I actually ran the university ministry of Hillsong for 2 years at Sydney Uni. I was leading that. And in a way, I was kind of coordinating all of the university ministries in Sydney the second year, because I was just kind of trying to support the leaders at the other universities. But I can tell you now that, like, you know, the church didn't deem any young people coming through from the university to be that important, clearly, compared to all the spending that's been coming out recently. Because, you know, the main money that we were getting was actually from the student union at Sydney Uni to spend on our community, you know. We had trouble even just getting a bus to turn up to take our university students over to church on, forget the weekend, but on like a powerhouse night, or, you know, a young adult night.
So you're in charge of the ministry at Sydney Uni of Hill. I was, for 2 years. So is that like Hillsong on Sydney Uni campus, or?
Yes, when I first started, they were running a full-on service at Sydney Uni.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And I basically...
Not putting money into it. I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Oh, man.
I basically convinced the young adults pastor at Hillsong City that, yeah, like, if this was the amount of resource that was going to go into this service, that we shouldn't be running the service. And they agreed with me, and we culled the service when I took over. Not straight away, but like about 6 months later. And we ended up just focusing on connect groups, which was much better, because like the main thing university students want at university is community, you know, and they want...
And it's what a missed opportunity again, but they must see it as not worth the investment, I guess.
Well, it was just silly. Like, I mean, I don't want to be down on what the people before me were doing, like, because they were doing their best and they were trying to do something good, you know, they believed in what they were doing, but without the church putting resources behind it, you know, it was just going to be a pushing a rock up a big hill, you know, like it was just going to...
But this is how the church treats it was how they treated most of the things that weren't kind of, I don't want to say profitable because that feels too crude, but I'm going to say profitable. Like, I was involved. I was involved with Hillsong Miranda, which was down in the Sutherland Shire. So I was part of the church build down there. And I was there for like a solid 10 years. And then what happened was, just randomly one week, the pastor who I knew because I was, you know, working alongside them on this church plant, was given an ultimatum by George.
Agajanian.
Yeah, George Agajanian, that they could either break free of the church and become their own campus, or be subsumed into Hillsong City, because the church wasn't growing fast enough for them to warrant putting any more money into this satellite campus of Hillsong in the south of Sydney, which you know, we did 2 services on a weekend. We had a youth ministry.
They
We
were
had
going to pull the funding kind of thing.
They did.
They did.
They went
They
ahead
did.
and did that.
George came down, spoke to the church, closed the church up, and that was it. And a lot of people left the church. A lot of people left Christianity. Actually, a lot of people just completely walked away from the church. The pastor and the family and his family were just thrown to the curb. And
Sorry, were they supposed to attend at the city? Was that the?
Well, the idea was, oh, well, you will shut the campus down, because he was like the pastor was like, I can't run this church without the assistance of the larger church. Like, I need that money for officers and hall hire and stuff, and we don't have enough of it coming from this church. Your support makes this viable. So he said, well, let's just subsume into the city campus and help our parishioners transfer over to city campus. But we're talking the Sutherland Shire here, right? People don't leave the Sutherland Shire. No, nobody travels.
Yeah, I mean, but it's a 40-minute drive.
Yeah, exactly.
40-minute drive.
Yeah. So they canned it, and the parishioners went and found other churches, or they left the church entirely. And this particular pastor lost his job, and that was it. Kicked to the curb. And, you know, he previously been he was a very faithful man to the church. Like, he'd been their worship.
He taught me at college.
Yeah, everybody
been
knew
on
him.
staff a long time.
But I think there was quietly, you know, like, they just wanted to get rid of him. I get the vibe. And
how long did that take, that process? Like, so George turns up, gives you the ultimatum. How long you got?
Like, from when he told me, it was like maybe like a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Like,
Shocking,
it wasn't.
isn't it?
I remember he was looking really down. I was like, is everything all right? And he was like, hey, this is what's happened. And I was like, okay.
Absolutely.
So, and he asked me what I would do. And I was like, well, you can't run this without
A 20-year-old.
like asking. Yeah, I was in my early 20s. But I mean, like, you know, fair enough. Like, he didn't have very much support around him, and I guess he trusted me. But I was like, I don't think we've got much choice here. We've got to take there really wasn't. I mean, and ultimately it was his decision. I'm sure he asked a bunch of people what they thought, but like, it was horrific. That whole experience was just awful. Like, you know, I'm still good friends with his son, the pastor's son, and we still meet up regularly. And, you know, it's still, you know, it's just.
How long had that church been operating?
It would have been about 10 years, or at least close to.
Shocking.
You know.
Wow.
And we worked so damn hard on that church. Like, we were there morning, noon, and night over the weekend, from like Friday to Sunday, doing stuff to make it a success. But yeah, they just deemed it not financially viable anymore, and so they cut it and killed it, and that was it. And I went to city because I'd always sort of been going to the city as well as going to this other church. But that just showed me how ruthless. It was the first experience of how ruthless.
I wonder how many churches then are under that kind of pressure right now, because they've had a tap on the shoulder and, you know, you'd better get your numbers up. And so that's brutal.
Yeah.
That's brutal.
I'm fairly certain that there's a lot of pressure on churches of Hillsong satellite churches. They really are quite ruthless at that top level. And I just, like, I know people who were denied, like, they don't have paid parental leave. So, you know, there were some people that were, like, you know, forced to essentially just take leave without pay in order to have kids, you know, who weren't given any grace at all when it came to that sort of stuff. You know, meanwhile, they're like it's part of their core branding for their like internal team is like, look at how many children are coming. Like, it's all about families, right? It's all about families, isn't it?
It's all about families and welcome home and stuff. Because there's an old story of actually Sutherland CLC where they were just a Christian Life Centre getting around, you know, singing some songs with an overhead projector, and Mike Murphy turned up and went, oi, you know, you'll call yourself this, and they begged, like, please, this isn't our theology, this isn't us. Yeah, get on the truck. It just must be going on everywhere. That's all.
Yeah.
I do have another story from Hillsong London, which is not my story. I don't know if you think you should include it. It's like one of my housemates experienced it. It just like really speaks to the culture, I think. One thing I had my own kind of pretty negative experience in the creative team at Hillsong London, but my housemates too, like one of my housemates, he was a professional musician as well, like, and volunteering at Hillsong, so not on staff. And he like at our flat where we lived, we actually had our flat, which was 5 people. No, sorry, we were 4 people that all went to Hillsong and all were on, were all creative. And then across the hallway from us was another flat that also had another 4 people who all volunteered at Hillsong and worked professionally in music as well. So we were like quite a little community there. What ended up happening, like we had like a prayer morning most weeks that one of my housemates was running. Then he, I think he basically organized like an evening, like at one of the 2 flats in our building where they were just going to like have some worship, like some music and like pray and whatever. And so they did that. So they, they all volunteered Hillsong. So they played all the Hillsong songs and then had a prayer night. It got back to the staff at Hillsong London that this was happening. And they basically said to my housemate who was running it that they weren't allowed to play the Hillsong songs in that context because it was not an official church event, which was just like such a ridiculous thing to say to him. This is one of those people that was playing for 7 services a weekend every week.
Like, because I really liked that song. It's like, every step I take with you. Me and Jesus. Like, if I sing that, do I have to give them 50 cents?
Yeah, exactly. Is it just like they want royalties? They want the license number? It's like how ridiculous. These people are giving so much of their time, and then they're having their own little community night with the community that they had, formed around being at the church, and they were told no, they couldn't play the music there.
Yeah, but you can't just go around having people that sent this video that like there's your Dior that like us basics would be allowed to see, but then there's high level Dior as well. So, you can't, that only some people will be allowed to purchase. You can't just have people going around singing Hillsong. So, and it's very controlled, isn't it? Because then they can keep the brand a lot purer.
Yeah, exactly. And like they would say, oh, we want to control like the quality of our music. I mean, but that's an outrageous thing to say to these people who all played at Hillsong and volunteered their time. You know what I mean? Like,
but it's art as well. Is it? I mean, it's art, and wasn't it supposed to be worship music? Like if you're singing it at home to God or something, do you have to text them or something?
But where do you draw the line with this?
It's off brand. I don't know. Was it supposed to be used in that context? Like at that time? Wow, and that really does. I kind of monologued at you before we jumped on the pod that like there's just so much to this world of music, and I always think of like walking to church and like there's your friend on the door that gives you the pamphlet and goes like hi and stuff, and then like you're looking for your seat and stuff, but there's that strumming in the background like choo 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 choo, and you're just like oh yeah, and people are chatting and stuff, and it's Sunday morning and there's that strumming in the background, like because we're getting ready, we're just sort of warming up to get into proper church, and from that moment you're in this music thing.
Well, you do know, don't you, that all of that stuff is like planned down to the minute and the second.
But tell me everything, please. Tell me everything, and tell me what it's like from the on stage part. Like, well, I mean, they're talking to my friend, and it's like, oh, this is crazy, and there's people talking and stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, they have what they call the pre-roll. So that's prior to the service starting. They have 5 minutes of like professional video footage with Hillsong music. Like it's like a very well cut film clip with Hillsong music and like inspirational text on the screen and stuff. And that all comes actually it's not all Hillsong music, is it, in that pre-roll?
Well, normally it's like a kind of like a hypey sort of track
with like meant to be like building the energy, ready for the service to start, And for those of us on creative team, like we know that pre-roll off by heart, like what's in it, right? And we know that when it gets
casual and stuff though.
Well, I mean, it's pretty like.
I think these days, or at least when we were there, it was definitely much more pumpy.
Yeah, it was quite pumpy when we were there.
Like sort of, hey, baby, you all right?
You finished?
You finished. Yeah, I don't know if we've had strummy music kind of for a while.
Although, no, like, so I can't even remember what the detail is of the pre-roll, but at the time we were going, anyone on creative team knew the point where it was 30 seconds until the service starting, and it did have a change in the the music dropped out and there was this like pad thing that came in, and then it was more like inspirational kind of church related music that would come into the video. And we knew at that point that's when we were to leave the green room and to stand on the stage and get ready to start.
And we know to sit down. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we all knew that is 30 seconds before the video ends as well.
So it conditions everybody. Everybody knows,
Yep.
I hear this music, this is what I do.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, just thinking back stuff, I haven't memorized this, just like you kind of thinking back, and that's I can remember knowing, okay, it's like being in class. You kind of like you chat, and then the teacher walks in, and then you know to sit down, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So the whole creative team ends up on stage. The congregation knows to get ready for the service as well, and then it starts.
Well, there's an order to that as well, right?
And that's the moment when Scott and Kat's little girl came into the room and it was time to go swimming. So they went swimming. Such lovely people, and we talked on several occasions about several different things, and yeah, all of it music, and you know, right up close. Awesome. I'd love to make some announcements about all the bonus content and early release stuff that is coming, but I seem to be the only person in the history of this podcast platform not to be able to resolve that error on the screen. And hey, Raphael from customer service has stopped writing to me, but you know, here's hoping. Hey, always been one of those special cases, you know, where they go like, I've never seen one of those before. So hang in there. You know what you got to do to be a part of this pod gang. Like, share, subscribe, listen over, send us feedback. I really love sending your feedback on to the guests afterwards. It's like this really, like after all this stress of the interview and what he's saying and then the editing, you know, is this all right? Okay, good, it's on. And then the really cool stuff comes. So, you know, chuck a comment up if you get a chance. Send us a note. Like, share, subscribe, turn it into a video, and take away the number you first thought of. So the time has come to say goodbye to, wow, if you're over 50, LEAVIN, Hill, SONG. Have a really good week or day until we next speak. I've edited part 2, but I want to drag it out a bit. Please look after yourselves. I need you well and strong. We've got, you know, court cases and all kinds of things to look forward to. Something else I'd encourage you to have a look at before we forget is reading Hillsong, a little project started a couple of years ago where we read Hillsong books, and we're looking to do more and more. So if you're interested in being one of Reading Hillsong's readers, check it out on Insta, Facebook. Please get in touch. We want a variety of voices reading our holy texts so that, you know, the message can get spread as far and wide as possible. Check out the Reading Hillsong trailer and you'll see what I mean. Thanks so much for spending this time with us. Me, all of us. Be kind to yourself. Go on, you can do it. Kind to everyone else. Might as well be kind to yourself as well, hey? Even it out. Keep leaving Hillsong. We'll talk soon.